Hey guys, this is Lyndon here for another ActionVFX.com tutorial. So if you've ever been to the ActionVFX website, you've definitely noticed the explosions, right? The explosions are one of the big primary collections of ActionVFX.com. And so there's basically two reasons why explosions are so cool. Firstly, because they are visually stunning, alright? Everyone loves explosions. But secondly, what makes them really cool is that it's something that happens in real life. So that's the cool thing. You can composite this absolutely visually stunning element into your scene while it still is realistic because explosions actually happen in real life. So alongside of compositing those explosions, we're also going to be adding in some ground cracks, debris, exploding debris, and things like that, because that's also very important, because here the missile hits the ground and you can really feel the power of that explosion when there's some destruction on the ground. So that's absolutely essential to have destruction when explosions happen, right? So the two things kind of go together, because after all, that's what explosions are. It's just like burst of power, and there's bound to be some destruction when there's an explosion. So I'm excited to cover these two fundamental topics, but I don't want to talk about this too long. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so before we get started, there is one thing I want to do, because you guys gotta know how good this stuff is that we're going to be doing today. Look at this. Before, after. Before, look at that. I know some of y'all are probably freaking out right now. I'm freaking out right now. I'm just trying to contain my excitement, because just look how good that is. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. So let's go ahead and find our footage somewhere in this right here and drag it into a new composition by going over this icon. So it creates a new composition. Let me go ahead and remove all these. Yeah. So we have a new composition here with our footage. So obviously the first thing to do is track it. So I don't really care how you track it. It doesn't matter if you do a 2D track, if you do a 3D track, you know, whatever you want to do. You can even go up here, animation, track and Mocha AE. You could do that. It probably wouldn't offend me if you just grabbed a null object and tracked it manually, alright? Everything's fine, as long as you track your scene. So that's what we have here. And in fact, how I did it in this scene was, click on the footage, hit animation, track, and Mocha AE. And that opens a separate window, a separate tracker tool that it actually comes with After Effects, so you can track your footage. And I'm not going to show you guys how to do this because it takes too much of our time, just like how I'm talking now is taking up a lot of our time actually. So maybe I'll just go ahead and move on, so I won't waste any more of our time. So here's null tracking our footage. It follows the ground, and this is what we're going to parent all of our stock footage elements to. So it actually works pretty well. There's not any 3D perspective in here, so we don't have to really do a 3D track, right? But it definitely is an option just to do a track camera if it works well for your shot. So now we do need to find where exactly the missile needs to hit the ground and when it hits the ground, right? So let's go ahead and scrub through and see exactly when it needs to happen. So we can see a little flash of light that they shine, so that's when it needs to explode. So let's do it about right there. We'll go ahead and create a marker right here. Hold Shift 1, it creates a marker. The universal marker just shows us when the explosion needs to happen, so we'll have a nice reference there. So let's go ahead and bring in our first ground crack element. So this is just a simple ground crack. So what we could do is just, that looks pretty good right there. Maybe someone poured some concrete and okay, never mind. Alright, so we need to composite this into the scene, right? Because it doesn't blend very well. So the first method I'm going to go over is blending mode. So you can see that they made this completely gray. So what you can do is go to the blending modes and go to overlay. So the overlay is a mixture of the multiply blending mode and the screen blending mode. So depending on what the brightness is of the layer, it either screens or multiplies. But with pure gray, it doesn't do anything, right? It just completely makes it transparent. So what we also need to do is parent this to the tracking, so it follows the screen. So we have this pretty much perfect blend because we did the overlay blending mode. And if it's not perfect, if you see a little bit of those edges and you want to fix that, just go to curves, and then we'll make some adjustments so it matches perfectly. So we'll bring this up a little bit, and then bring this down until it matches the scene perfectly, just like that. So awesome, it blends in completely well. So that's what we did. We did the overlay blending mode with that element. So there's a little problem here in case it ends too early. In this case, it goes out of the screen. But I'm going to go ahead and show you guys. You can right click, and this new feature in After Effects, what you can do is go to time, freeze on last frame. And what it does is I guess it's pretty self-explanatory. It freezes on the last frame. And you could also do the same effect with just doing time, enable time remapping, and just making it freeze in the last frame. But anyway, that's a cool update they did to After Effects, and it makes it a lot easier. So there we go. We have this ground crack element composited into our scene. So let's make sure we have this positioned right, and we'll scale it down just a little bit, pretty close to the biker. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and composite in another ground crack, or this time it's a ground burst. So we go ahead and kind of view this element. So firstly, this element is slowed down by a factor of 2, so it has a really fine frame rate, right? But we need to speed it up for this scene because this is happening in full time, all right? So let's go ahead and do 50 because it makes it 50% as long or 2 times as fast. And so it's going to happen in real time. So let's go ahead and parent this to the tracker null. I grab the parent right here and parent to the tracker null. And then let's go ahead and position this in the right spot. So let's go ahead and move this in. And we probably need to rotate it because it's not exactly parallel with the ground. Also think I want to scale it down just a little bit, so something like that. So, and also let's make sure that it happens at the right time. So maybe right there. So now it's time to try to blend this into the scene just like the other one. So we do have the option of doing overlay, and that's a pretty cheap way of just making it good. But as you can see, these ground elements don't look right when they're in the air. Firstly, because they're darker than anything else, right? Because this footage doesn't actually go completely black in these dark spots, but this overlay makes it too dark and doesn't do a natural blend. So we actually don't want to do an overlay because, for one, it's actually transparent. You can see this, look at this element right here. When we go over light, it's actually transparent. So we don't want that overlay blending mode unless it's on the ground like the other element. So we actually can't do a blending mode. Let's go back to normal, and we're just going to have to color match this to our scene. So let's go ahead and apply curves, and for starters, let's go ahead and darken this. Like I was talking about before, it doesn't get completely black, so we need to bring up those shadows just like that. And let's go ahead and darken the gamma, so we're getting somewhere. Now one thing I have noticed is that this spot over here is brighter than this over here. So what we can do to fix that is do pre-compose, and do leave all attributes, hit OK, and that doesn't change anything, but it does create a composition with our original footage in there. So we can just go ahead and darken this spot. So let's go ahead and create an adjustment layer, and then we'll mask out this spot right here. Control Alternate Y shortcut to create adjustment layer. Pretty cool. Now let's go ahead and go to curves, darken that spot a little bit. Add some feather. So hopefully that's going to help. Yeah, it definitely does help. So that makes that spot kind of match the luminance of everything else. So obviously we need to tint this the right color because it's not looking, because it's too desaturated. So let's do tritone. Bring this in here and change the blend with original until it matches about right. This doesn't have to be perfect because it's just a kind of jumble of destruction here. So one thing I actually might want to do is just kind of take away some opacity of this side right here. I'm going to do with this mask, do subtract and just feather it out, so it kind of helps it blend in on the edge there. Yeah, that looks good. And last thing I want to do is do time freeze on last frame, so it does the same thing as the other one, so it lasts the whole composition. So we've definitely gone over some pretty sweet techniques already, but I do want to go ahead and check out a preview so you guys can see what's going on. Alright, so that's definitely looking pretty good, but there is one problem when it first fades in here. It doesn't look very good at all because it just pops in. What we're actually going to do is fade it in, so we're just going to go to the opacity, hit T. It's a good shortcut. You really need to know that. If you don't know that, opacity is T. Alright, go ahead and add a keyframe and move back and just go ahead and fade it in so you can't see that sharp pop into the scene there. So that's just going to fade in like that. Boom. So good. And then we also could do the same thing for the other one, but the other one blends in pretty well already. And what we could do, see it's actually darker over here, so we could animate the brightness of this element. So I'll go ahead and do that with a time lapse. Alright, so I just kind of animated the brightness and contrast here to really actually help it blend in a lot better. Now that we have that, let's go ahead and add some debris that are actually flying into the air. So these are some nice ground bursts and ground cracks, but we need some debris actually flying way into the air because this is an explosion that's pretty powerful and some actual destruction needs to happen. So let's go ahead and I'm going to drag in these medium debris, medium-sized debris, and these are also slowed down by a factor of 2. So let's go to time stretch, and do 50%, so it speeds it up times 2. There we go. So it's going to be in real time now. Let's go ahead and composite this into the scene as good as possible. Make it go ahead and start at the right time there, and we'll actually make it probably start at this frame while it's already busted. Make it kind of start there. Just kind of see that bust there, and let's go ahead and kind of position it so that's on the ground, right? So maybe something like that. Let's hope it's still in the right position. So maybe that'll work. So the next thing to do is actually to color match this because it's too bright. So why don't we just copy the color correction we did from this ground bursting layer. So let's go ahead and copy this, Control C, Control V, and that's going to be a decent color correction there. So I'm going to move it a few frames forward so that it blends with that destruction that comes up afterwards. Yeah, so it blends in really well. So the destruction comes up and then it appears into the scene, so you can't really see it pop into the scene. And we also could fade the opacity if that's necessary. So I think it's necessary to also do time freeze on last frame so it'll last the rest of this composition. And looks a little too dark here because the elements extend out. So let's go ahead and mess with the animation of this brightness and contrast. And see, the issue is that this side over here is actually brighter than this part over here. So you could actually do like maybe a mask and kind of fix it, but it looks pretty good like this because you can't really, it's good to have some brightness variation anyway in the destruction, so it's not a problem. Now that we have those debris composited, there's one more debris element I want to add. So we've added 3 debris elements so far. We've added the ground crack, the ground burst. Now we added some like medium debris and also add some small debris. And these small debris are really just going to fly out. I'm going to make this kind of a big layer. So what I'm going to do here is just also speed it up by a factor of 2. So that'll be real time. And let's go ahead and drag this into the right point in time. Like I said, I'm going to make this pretty big. And it shouldn't matter if it kind of takes down a little bit of the resolution because they're fast moving blurry elements anyway, if you know what I'm saying, so shouldn't be an issue. Go ahead and parent this to the tracking data and put this behind the medium debris probably, so just like that. And let's move it up maybe like here, and let's go ahead and add that color correction. So we'll just go ahead and copy the color correction from our other debris. So this all blends in together pretty well. So that these small elements just kind of fly out much further than the other ones because they're smaller. There's going to be more force to them, I guess. So that all blends in together pretty well. We have this destruction. Let's go ahead and take another preview so hopefully you guys aren't lost so far. But all we've been doing is just compositing those elements, color correcting them, and placing them in the right positions and points in time so that they match the scene really well. Let's go ahead and take a preview. Alright, that looks all really good except for the fact I see a little pop at the beginning. That's probably because of these small debris. We'll go ahead and actually fade their opacity in. So we'll hit T, just kind of fade that opacity in so they don't pop in too quickly, just like that. And we also could fade in, just do a small fade for these medium debris, the opacity of these medium debris. So it just does a small fade so that it's not too harsh of a pop in, so it doesn't look unnatural. So I'm going to go ahead and drag in this 2K explosion. You can also get it 4K. But in this example, I just do 2K because it's probably what a lot of you guys are going to have anyway. But if you have 4K, hey, that's fine. It's going to be better resolution. That's awesome. So let's go ahead and parent this explosion to the tracker null. We'll put it actually under the exploding debris like that. And this is the form of kind of depth compositing that we're going to do, right? We have it in front of some elements and behind other elements. So we're just going to place the explosion behind these 2 elements, just like that. Let's make sure the explosion is at the right altitude here, so maybe something like that. We'll drag this anchor point down here, and we'll just scale it up. Maybe we'll just scale it up just a little bit. So let's go ahead and check out a preview, see how it looks so far. Awesome, yeah, that looks good. Now that we have that explosion positioned just where we want it, and some of those elements in front of the explosion, we need to go ahead and start working on the glow and the compositing, making this blend into the scene. So the first thing we're going to do is pre-compose all the elements that are above the explosion layer, on top of the explosion layer, that are covering the explosion layer. So in this case, it would be these 2 debris right here. And we also need to make a copy of the tracking data, because when we pre-compose it, it's not going to be able to access that null object if it's not in the same composition. So we made a duplicate of that tracking data. Let's go ahead and parent the debris to this new duplicate we made, and then let's go ahead and pre-compose them all together. Move all attributes in the new composition, just like that. So we have this composition of all the elements that are above the explosion layer. And then we also need to pre-compose this explosion layer. So for that, we'll do the same thing, make a duplicate of the tracking data, parent the explosion to the new duplicate, then we'll pre-compose those 2 together. So we'll have this composition of just the explosion. So what we're actually going to do is drag the explosion on top of those debris that are supposed to be covering the explosion layer. But what we're going to do, we'll name this covering debris because they're covering the explosion layer. And then what we'll do is go to the explosion, and we'll type in this set matte effect and drag it onto the explosion layer. Then we'll set this parameter take matte from layer to covering debris. All right. So now the explosion only exists where those debris exist, but we want to invert that. So now the explosion does not exist where the covering debris exist. In fact, the explosion is actually on top of the covering debris, except there's just like a hole cut. There's holes cut out from the explosion layer that allow you to see the covering debris. So the explosion is actually on top of these covering debris. Just like I said, it's like a hole in the explosion, exactly where all those debris are, because this set matte effect took the matte from the covering debris. So it all works out pretty well, and there's actually a very good reason we did this. Let's go ahead and get to the glow, and we've actually covered this in 2 tutorials already, how to glow fire, but I will go over a little bit of how to do it, but I'm not going to go over everything because we've actually done that before. So I'm just going to go over the main techniques that I did in this particular shot. So here's all these glow layers. So let's go ahead and turn everything off and start from scratch. So this is what your clip actually should look like at first. All right, so we have this this explosion with the debris mat in front of it. So what I did first is go ahead and darken the layer so we can get some of that detail out of it. So it's actually more of a detailed explosion. And then what I did is this cool technique. Go to this hue and saturation effect, go to the reds, and actually kind of position these reds. What we did is actually turn down the lightness of the reds and actually turned up the saturation. So when we turned down that lightness, it actually got rid of a lot of the saturation, but it did bring in a lot of detail. So we turned down that lightness, it brings in a lot of detail, but turns down that saturation. So what we need to do is turn that red saturation back up. So it actually adds more detail without removing the saturation. So that's a really cool technique. I suggest you remember that. Hue and saturation, go to the reds, turn down the red lightness, turn up the red saturation. And then for the master saturation, I just turn that down a little bit. So just making adjustments with the hue and saturation there. So it just adds some of the detail back. So let's take a before and after. So it's much more detailed explosion. So make it look a lot better. So then the third thing we did is just add some contrast. We end up really complement those highlights with this curves effect. So we just really bring out those highlights. It's going to be a really dull explosion if you don't do this step. So remember to do that. Then we just add a tint effect because it's looking too saturated. So we already got this really poppy explosion so far. The next thing that's important to do is add that solid composite, and this is actually very important to do before you add the glows. So basically there's an alpha matte here, and what we need to do is a solid composite effect with the color being black, so it just fills in those transparent areas, and this is very important to do before we add those glows. So we've covered this in other effects, adding glows. We add kind of a tight glow, and then we add a more expanded glow, and then we would do another glow, but then there's some edge issues, so we had to add a solid composite between those glows. If you guys are understanding what I'm saying. Then we just did another hue and saturation effect just to kind of color correct it like we want it. So that's pretty much all we did with that explosion. Come out with something looking absolutely beautiful. Like every time my brother walks into the room, I tell him, look me in the eye and tell me that's not the most beautiful thing you've ever seen in your life. That's what I say to him. And he never says it, but I know he thinks this is the most beautiful thing he ever seen in his life. Actually, it's more beautiful than his girlfriend. I know he doesn't want to admit that, but it is. This is more beautiful than his girlfriend. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all those effects to our new explosion. Alright, so you guys really don't have to worry about me talking too long because my voice is actually going out because I've been talking for so long. But let's go ahead and go to this explosion, turn the blending mode to screen so it actually blends, overlays the bright colors onto the scene. So it blends it in there. There's also something I do want to mention, and that is sometimes it's a good idea to add a black explosion behind the explosion itself, right? In this case, the explosion is really bright and there's actually a dark background, so it's not necessarily important in this scene, but I do want to cover it in case it's different in your scene. So let's go ahead and take out all these layers. Sometimes when your background is actually a little bit brighter, turn this up a little bit. Sometimes when your background's brighter, your explosion looks really thin, right? You can see through your explosion because these dark spots, these actually aren't supposed to be transparent like the dark outer edges, right? These are supposed to be thick black fills in the fire. So, well, how you can fix that is just make a duplicate of your explosion and just go ahead and solo it. Go ahead and remove all of these and go to the tint effect and make this pure black. So what we need to do is basically kind of fill in those transparent edges because that's where this black needs to fill right here. So what we can do is go ahead and do a fast blur and go ahead and fast blur it out so it kind of blends into those spots right there. Let's go ahead and turn that layer on. We turn this to multiply so it darkens, and then we turn the explosion over that. It's kind of an issue because it has this dark glow around the explosion. You can see this dark glow, and that's not right. There's actually a really easy way to fix this. What we can do is go to key light effect, and you're thinking, what in the world? What do you need about to key out something? I don't know. But what I'm actually going to do is go to this edge color correction option over here, check enable edge color correction, and we can brighten the edges of this element right here. You can kind of see what it's doing. It's brightening the edges. And this is actually considered an edge in here, but we can do something to fix that. Just go ahead and add a curves effect before this, and turn up the alpha channel, and so it kind of gets rid of that edge. So just really bring up the brightness of this here. Make sure that it doesn't expand around the edges of this explosion. So what we need to do is probably turn up edge grow so that it grow, yeah, like that. So that black glow is not expanding out of the edges of the explosion, but it is filling in those black centers. All right. So that can be really helpful in many circumstances. Whew. So we've covered so many things. Like, oh my goodness, I can't believe how many things we've actually covered today. You know, we've made this most beautiful thing that you've ever seen in your life. Let me go ahead and turn this off because that's not necessary anymore. And there's a few more completely necessary things that we do need to add for the explosion. First off is a flash. The whole environment needs a flash when the explosion happens. So let's create an adjustment layer, put this above everything except the explosion itself, add curve to this adjustment layer, and just kind of brighten everything up like this. And a little bit of contrast maybe, and then turn up the reds, and then turn down the blues just a little bit. And then let's go ahead and animate this. So the brightest spot of the explosion is probably about right here. We'll go to the opacity, 100%. And at this point is when it first starts happening, so I'll turn this down to 0, so there's 0% opacity at this point. Probably about right here is when the explosion pretty much fades out, and I'll do 0% opacity. So what I want to do is actually, another important thing to do is actually duplicate this, so we'll make a duplicate of it, and then we'll actually move it about right here, parent it to the tracking data, and then we'll make a circular mask kind of around the base of the explosion. So this is kind of where the explosion is close to the ground, where it really just glows out. So then we'll hit F, go to feather, turn the horizontal feather up much more than the vertical feather because we unlinked it here. Yeah, just something like that. So we turned the horizontal feather up much more to create a much more realistic effect. So that kind of helps really add the brightness of that bottom part of the explosion. And we can actually maybe put this over the explosion if it looks okay. So yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Putting it over the bottom of that explosion. And also, we need to put this explosion fill explosion actually under the debris layers, right? Because you can see here that it's actually over those debris layers, and just kind of put it under all the ground cracks and ground things. So it only covers the background, not the debris and everything. All right, so now time for that missile that came in. I don't know if you saw it when you saw the preview, but as the missile comes in and it hits the ground, explodes, because actually I had several people ask me, like when I was editing the scene, what caused the explosion. So I had to create a missile in there to make it look like something's actually causing the explosion. Not like a landmine or something. I don't know. We got this missile image right here. Missile, and let's just go ahead and rotate it right. Scale it down a decent bits because I mean it's not like a huge explosion, so it's just kind of this small missile like this. And then what we need to do is actually probably parent this to the tracking, even though it's going to be moving really fast. And let's go ahead and kind of animate its path. So it needs to hit the ground right about here when that reference marker happens. We'll go ahead and put it right there, and then let's go ahead and add a keyframe. Go back quite a few frames because it's 60 frames per second, so you had to go back actually a lot of frames to amount to any amount of time. So just like that, and it's gonna come in, animate, hit the ground right at that point, and that's when the explosion needs to happen. So let's go ahead. The important thing to do here is add motion blur to this missile. So go ahead and check motion blur right there, then enable motion blur for the comp, and let's go ahead and kind of color correct this missile so that's not so bright. Probably do a tritone. That works pretty well for like blending things in. For the brights, we'll just select kind of one of the bright colors. For the midtones, we'll select something like this, and for the darks, whatever. All right, so that missile should blend in a lot better. All right, and then the next thing to do is obviously make the missile disappear once it hits the ground. So we hit Control-Shift-D. That's going to cut the layer, and we'll do the same thing for right here. Control-Shift-D. And we actually want to put this missile below the ground destruction layers so that split second you can see it kind of go behind those. Make it look like it's going into the ground, I guess. So something like that. boom. So it hits the ground, causes that explosion. So it's just like that. Let's go ahead and check out a little preview of this. And you can see in this scene here that actually some stuff is happening before the missile actually hits the ground. Sometimes that's not noticeable. Other times it might be noticeable, so you might just need to trim it down a little bit so that nothing happens before the missile actually hits the ground. So maybe we'll just trim it up a little bit. It's up to you to decide whether you should have it or not. Or maybe animate the opacity of this explosion so it fades in a little bit. And as always, let's not forget to add some lens dirt to the scene. We've already covered this in 2 tutorials already, so I don't want to go over this again. But if you're confused about how to add lens dirt or anything, just go check out those tutorials we've done before, and it should explain everything. So we just animated the opacity and added a wiggle expression so it would flicker a little bit. So that's just the lens dirt. That actually is from ActionVFX.com. You can get it from the free section. It's pretty cool. So it always really complements the brightness of the explosion when you have that lens dirt. Another thing we have in our scene is some dust waves, and you can see them here. Just some dust waves. You can get these dust waves from the free section in ActionVFX.com. But basically, this is what they look like at first when you first get them. That's not going to really work with that ground line there. So we got to remove that. And basically, how I did it here was just added a linear wipe and then add some feather to that linear wipe so it kind of faded out. And then did some roughen edges. So how I animated the roughen edges was just did an expression to the evolution, or you can just do keyframes, animate the evolution, and also did some expressions to animate the offset turbulence, and you can also do keyframes for that as well. So basically I just composited 2 of those dust waves. One of them is kind of a broad dust wave, so it's larger and maybe a little less opaque. Another one's smaller and closer to the explosion, so it did 2 of those dust waves. So they actually look pretty good in the scene. Also, I want you to know that I did not do a blending mode to composite these in. You could do like screen like this, and but the problem with this is that if you do screen, it's going to brighten the scene because screen is an additive blending mode, so it adds colors, it brightens things up, and dust is not supposed to brighten things. It's just supposed to composite or mix in there. So this is how I go about fixing this, and I want you to remember this technique because it's very, very useful. Basically, let's take it off that blending mode so it's on normal. Basically, I went to this shift channels effect and then turn on take alpha from luminance. It created transparency on the layer and it took the transparency from the luminance, right? So the brighter it is, the more opaque it is. So that's a really cool technique. Now we don't have to do a blending mode because it's going to take out that black, make the black transparent and the white opaque. The problem is, as it gets less and less opaque, it gets darker and darker, and it's not supposed to do that. It's just supposed to get less opaque, not darker. So what we did is just do a fill layer, so it just fills it in with one solid color. Just kind of select the color somewhere around the ground or whatever, and then it fills it in with one solid color. So that's the whole technique about how I did those dust waves. Now we don't have to do a blending mode, so we just composite 2 of those dust waves in there, and that works pretty well. So guys, that's pretty much it. We've covered so much today. Done the explosion, ground debris, the ground cracks, animated that missile, going over a lot of glowing techniques and how we made this match the scene, make it look really good. So that's pretty much all we have today. Also, it's very important to have a little shake layer right when the explosion hits the ground. It's actually very, very important to have a shake. So what I did here is just had a adjustment layer with a transform effect on it. So I added this shake expression. You can learn about that other places, but we really don't have time to cover it today because this tutorial's gone on for so long. So we have this little shake layer here, so it adds a little shake right when the camera hits the ground. That's actually really, really important. Also, for everything, you want to turn on the motion blur for all these different layers, the ground destruction, the ground debris, even the explosion itself, because the camera's panning across. There needs to be motion blur in all those elements. So just go through, add motion blurs to all the layers that are actually moving. Anything that's parented to the tracking needs to have motion blur. Explosion in here needs to add motion blur. So all those, go inside those pre-comps and add motion blur to anything that actually needs it. So all these layers, motion blur. So there we go. We have motion blur to everything, and that really definitely is necessary for blending it into your scene. Also, we added in the other example, we added heat distortion. We actually cover that in other tutorials as well. So I'm not going to worry about the heat distortion in this video as well because we've done so much. I really hope you guys have enjoyed this tutorial, learned some great fundamental techniques. To me, this has really been fun, and we just want to create more tutorials for you guys, so just drop a comment, let us know what you would like to see in a future episode using ActionVFX.com stock footage. We have some pretty talented visual effects artists, so don't be afraid to ask any questions you may have. Don't forget to stop by the website, download all the free effects and stock footage. I know you'll find that really useful. Anyway, I really hope to see you in the next tutorial.